It is now my pleasure to introduce and welcome our keynote speaker today, Chuck Gallagher. You may have seen Chuck on television or heard him on CNN, CBS, or NPR radio programs. His business insights are sought after for his strong position on ethics and ethical leadership. Chuck's focus is business, but his passion is empowering others. Chuck is a COO of a national company, and most of his success he credits to his school of hard knocks, described as sensitive, creative, insightful, captivating, and a person that connects the dots between behavior, choices, and success. Chuck gives his clients what they need to turn concepts into action and action into results. Chuck is going to talk to us about the human side of ethics. While most other ethics presentations focus on legal and compliance issues, Chuck uses his personal experience to expose the truth about emotions and ethical behavior. With pinpoint accuracy, he brings to light what we do, why we do what we do, and how to change that behavior. When companies can help their management and employees understand the human side of ethics, the roadmap to success becomes much easier to follow. Please help me welcome Chuck Gallagher.
Every choice has a consequence. On October 2nd, 1995, I took 23 steps. As I took those steps, I thought about my wife. I thought about my children, Rob and Alex. Oh, they were maybe this high at the time. I thought about my career. I thought about the church where I had been music director for 16 years or so. I thought about everything that defined my life. I lived in a small community in western North Carolina, Morganton. There I was Chuck Gallagher. I was a somebody. But on that day, as I took those 23 steps, on the 24th step, I reached out my hand, pushed open the door, and stepped into federal prison. There I became 11-642-058, an inmate. What most people would define as a nobody. Every choice has a consequence. Now, I have to say today, it's fortunately not that time. So I'm going to set this down. It would be much easier for me today to be able to continue this presentation if certain things were changed. Does anybody want to guess what that might be? Handcuffs. Thank you. So many of you ladies said handcuffs. Does anybody have experience with keys to the handcuffs? I might need a little help here. Fortunately, I have the keys up here. So we're going to see if I can do this is the strip portion of the show. And if I am dexterous, I might be able to get oh, that's not looking good. There, oh, whew. When one of them comes off, it makes me feel so good. I get the privilege of traveling all across the country, and for those of you that travel a fair amount, the key is not wanting to fit, but maybe we'll get lucky here in a minute. For those of you that get a chance to travel much, you know that whenever you go through TSA security, there we go. So much more comfortable when the handcuffs are off. You know that you can't carry more than 3.5 ounces of liquid. I, on the other hand, get to carry an orange jumpsuit, and 3 sets of handcuffs. So it's really exciting. So we're going to ditch the orange is the new black kind of thing. I'm going to step out of it. Used to try it a little different, but recovering from back surgery, I'm not quite as agile as I might have been in the past. But I go through airport security. I have my carry-on bags. It was like that coming here. I get to Charlotte. I put the bags on the conveyor belt. It always goes forward and then back. I don't know why that is, but here it is. It's going through and there is somebody looking at screens, just trying to catch the terrorist among us. And they see my handcuffs. And invariably, they will say, I need a supervisor, please. And the supervisor will waltz over and they'll look at the screen. He said, handcuffs, is that okay? And the supervisor will say, well, it's not a prohibitive item, it's okay. And then they look at me and they say, are you law enforcement? And I really want to say yes. I just think that would be like so cool. Except that's impersonating an officer subject to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. And having been to prison once, I don't want to go back, okay? So I look back at them and I say, no, I'm a pervert. And they look at me like, well, of course. Sometimes you just have to accept what people think. But before I get into the story about why, because some of you are asking this question, I can tell, I can see by the look on your face. Why did the North Dakota Long-Term Care Association hire a convict to come talk about ethics? So before I get into the story, I have some questions for you, okay? So this is going to be a participatory kind of experience for you. So I'm going to ask the first question. How many of you, this is by show of hands, nobody's going to have to say anything, but how many of you would voluntarily make an unethical choice? Raise your hand with gusto. Okay, I don't see many, if any. Okay, all right, so we'll let that be. So let's try the second one. How many of you think breaking the law is unethical? Raise your hands. Okay, some of you are having a real problem with this, okay? I mean, by what I'm seeing at this point, I got a few of you, but this was one of those slow-moving hand things. Maybe it's a North Dakota experience, I'm not sure, but some of you are like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe, okay, I guess I should say so. So let's ask another question. How many of you would voluntarily break the law? Raise your hands. Oh, well, I've got a lady on the front row. She's like, whoa, yeah, baby, I'm on that. Would you like to come up and share with us? She's like, no, not me, really. I didn't think he was going to call on anybody. Most of you did not raise your hands. I'm so distraught. All right, so what about, how many of you have driven on the interstate highway in the past 2 weeks? Raise your hands. Okay, there we have it. And now you know what the next question is. Right, and how many have exceeded the speed limit by 5 to 10 miles an hour in the past 2 weeks? Raise your hand on the interstate highways. Doesn't it make you feel good to be amongst people who voluntarily break the law, who say that it's unethical, but you weren't going to do anything unethical? Sometimes you have to think about the question of what is ethics and how do we apply it? Because you see, most people would say, I'm a very ethical person. If you ask most people, will you make ethical choices? Well, of course. In fact, I have people say to me, I know you have to be busy. I mean, speaking on ethics and all. And of course, the problem is most everybody thinks they're ethical, so therefore they don't need it until they make that choice that causes a problem. Let me ask one other quick question. Since we're on the issue of speeding, how many of you would voluntarily speed 30 miles over the speed limit on the interstate highways? Raise your hands. Okay, those are driving the BMWs. Most of you said you would not. All right, that's fine. Now let me change the question for a second. So here you are, you're in your community, it's a Sunday afternoon and you're playing with your grandchild. grandson, granddaughter, you're playing with your grandchild, you're having a great time in the afternoon, and then we'll call it youngster, some youngster comes driving through, not particularly experienced, moving a little too fast, loses it some, and hits your granddaughter who was just riding her bicycle, learning how to do it, and your granddaughter is in an automobile accident from her bike. Now, where you live, it's going to take roughly 20 to 30 minutes for the ambulance to get to you so that they can transport your granddaughter back to the hospital. Or, especially based upon the experience that you have, you recognize her injuries may not be life-threatening, but you could put her in the back of your SUV and get to the hospital a whole lot quicker and get her immediate care. How many of you would consider the possibility of doing that and speeding in order to get her there if you felt like it would make a difference? Okay, now we have a different choice. You see, the choice of ethics generally is a function of what is most appropriate based upon the facts and circumstances, and the other side to that question is what is generally acceptable. It's funny, it's generally acceptable to exceed the speed limit by 5 to 10 miles per hour. It's not to exceed it by 30 miles per hour. In fact, I was talking with a gentleman the other day. He said he had his daughter in the car. She had just gotten her permit, and they were driving along, and he was making sure that she knew how to drive, so when she went to get her license and went through the driving test, it would be fine. She was doing the speed limit, and he said, you need to speed up a little bit. Because it was frustrating to him to go the speed limit because nobody was, and everyone was passing him. And the question we might ask is, what were we teaching? Are we teaching someone to make ethical, honest, legal choices, or to follow what society seems to think is okay? So let's look at it from this perspective. On the screen you see this concept of what I call the integral model. And on the very top portion there's something that says our intention creates our behavior. Let me repeat that. Think about it for a second. Our intention then creates the behavior that will follow. Now I want to give you an example. And I give you this example with the risk that, considering the makeup of folks in the room, this might be a little raw. But I'm going to go there. Okay? Now, I want you to understand, as I give you this example, I am not condoning the behavior that I'm using in the example. But I want to go back into 2014, and I want to use the example of the football player Ray Rice. Now, if you ask Ray Rice a year ago, rewind the tape, if you ask him a year ago, do you want to, as a football player superstar, become the poster child for domestic abuse, what do you think he would have said? No. But intentions create behavior. Now, I do not condone his actions. I think his actions were reprehensible. But let me play out the scenario for you. Let me just play out the scenario because it illustrates the point so well. So here it is, Ray Rice, strapping football player, experience. He is on a career track that is taking him great places. He is connected with his fiancée, and I'm going to make an assumption. I'm going to make the assumption that perhaps he was not the kind of person to beat females up. That could be wrong, by the way. I don't know. I come from South Carolina. We're not chicken-eating buddies. Okay? And by the way, I'm working on my diction here because I know we do not pronounce consonants at all. And so occasionally I'm going to slip into that South Carolina accent, and when I do, I hope y'all can understand what I'm talking about. Just so you know. But here he is. He's with his fiancée. They're in a hotel, just like a hotel like this. They get in a heated argument. I mean, they're upset at each other, and sometimes people that care about each other get in heated arguments. So they're in this heated argument, back and forth, and they can be heated in the room, but when they step into the hall, they kind of have to be Okay. So they step in the hall, but they're angry. They're mad. They're fuming at each other, but they're walking down the hall, and he's thinking, I wish she'd shut up. And she's thinking, he needs to listen to me. And they're carrying on this argument at a detail level, but in the hall, they're quiet. Until they get in the elevator. And of course, we all know, when you get in the elevator, it's a private space. Some of you might want to be aware when you're in the elevator, if you little pinch here or there or something like that, get your little, whatever it might be. Somebody somewhere is looking on the video camera, okay, just so you know. And then they're going to watch it sometime later, and they're going to have some fun. And I've thought to myself, I need to be more careful when I'm on an elevator. But here they are, they get on the elevator, all of a sudden it's private. She is angry, she is in his face. He doesn't want to hear it anymore. Please, shut up, I don't want to hear this anymore. She's in his face, she spits at him. He's thinking to himself, would you just hush? And instinctively, boom. 20 minutes beforehand, did he intend to knock his fiancée out? I'm going to guess no. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm going to guess no. And then the door opens, and of course he is dragging her out, blaming it on too much alcohol. And the rest of the story is, he's become the poster child for domestic abuse. Just like Michael Vick, the football player, became the poster child for animal cruelty. Our intentions create our behavior. His intention was, just shut up. His behavior was reprehensible. The rest of the story changed his life and hers and ours in some way forever. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about intentions and behavior. Now, what I want to do is I want to start with a question, and some of you, I have determined when I go to a particular state, I do not want to pick out your examples, because sometimes I might connect with somebody's cousin, and that could be a problem. So I'm going to give you a couple of people, and here's the first one. You probably cannot see this real well, but if you happen to know who this man is, not the woman, the man, let me share with you. That is the former governor of the state of South Carolina, Mark Sanford. Now, I know you're a bit far removed from South Carolina, although, by the way, today it is warmer here than there, which, thank you, I appreciate you so much. But Mark Sanford decided that he was going to go to the Appalachian Trail, clear his mind. He was going to go hiking. No one in state government knew where he was. The truth was he was in Argentina with Conchica, his little fiancée. Well, not fiancée, he was married, okay? So he was married in South Carolina, but he goes to Argentina because he'd taken salsa lessons and he needed to know how to do this kind of stuff with somebody that really knew it. He just disappeared. And then you've got this guy, John Edwards, from North Carolina. Just so you know, I'm picking on the Carolinas, because I can get by with that. John Edwards was a senator from our state. Most everybody looked at John Edwards and said, in the heyday of his career, they said, he is a presidential hopeful. He was the darling of the Democratic Party. At the time, people looked at him and they said, he is young, he's articulate, he's good looking, not a hair out of place. The ladies said, he reminds them of John F. Kennedy. They were like, ooh, I could see him as my president. Of course, until they figured out that his wife was dealing with issues of breast cancer, and he hired this lady to be his videographer, who followed him around, apparently in many intimate places, and ended up being a mother to one of his children. And then let's look at this guy, Anthony Weiner. Look, I just want to say something here. If your last name is Weiner, don't run for office, okay? I mean, if I was running against you, what would you do? You'd have the Oscar Mayer Weiner mobile everywhere the person is. I mean, but here's Anthony Weiner. He takes out his phone, he gets on Twitter, he tweets his wiener to people. I mean, it's like, this weird. Crazy. It's like, what were you thinking? And of course, recently he ran for mayor of New York. Had he won, he was going to run for president. Yeah. Eric Holder was going to be his running mate. That would have been the Wiener Holder ticket. I'm just saying. So you sit back and you look at these three guys and you ask yourself this question. If you went back 10 years ago and you ask all three of them, intelligent, well-educated, upwardly mobile, and certainly advancing in their respective careers, would you do something that would derail your career and change your life forever? What do you think they would say? No. Yet they did. And if there is one thing that I can say to you, I would say this. There's a chance that could happen to anybody. I know most of us would say, nah, no way. But changes take place in life, and most of the time it doesn't start with, I'm going to do something crazy. So let's talk a little bit about what I refer to as the unethical continuum. Because anybody in this room that knows, and I'm going to put it this way, someone like me. What do I mean, someone like me? Someone that has had the education not to make a dumb, stupid choice, but did, that ended up making them, a person that wears an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. Anybody that knew me back in the day would have said, no chance. That would never happen. Not Chuck Gallagher. But it always starts small, and it's simple little steps. So let's take a look at some of those steps. The first step that I put down here is a step that I refer to as is not good for the customer. Good for me, not good for the customer. Now, most of the time, I will tell a story about my mother and buying a big screen TV, but I want to change that for you today because this is really relevant. My mother-in-law just went into an assisted living facility. And so when she went in the family, we began to look at everything that she had done by herself. We began looking at that, especially on the financial side, and said to ourselves, well, we need to understand where she is today because her life has changed, and therefore her financial needs have changed. And so we began looking at some of the investments that she had. Now, I'm going to say this. I love my mother-in-law, but she was a simple lady. She and my father-in-law lived a simple life. They were very frugal. In fact, I remember when he was alive, on the stove, there were what we refer to as 4 burners. 2 of them were out. I'm like, buy a new stove. He was like, you only need 2 at a time anyway, so why worry? So they were very frugal, and they had accumulated a lot in their life because they wanted to make sure they were ready for retirement. He had done an incredible job, without sophistication, of making some investments in the stock market that had proved to be wise and paid well, paid a nice dividend. But when he died, my mother-in-law got, well, I'm going to call it hoodwinked into connecting with another investment advisor. And the investment advisor said, we need to look carefully at your portfolio and make some changes. We need to consider the diversification aspect. And he was throwing around a lot of nice terms. But here's what it boiled down to is, I need to sell some of your portfolio because if I sell it, then I can create an income for myself. Because see, if I just take it over, there's no money. And I'm based on commission. So he sold 1/3 of her portfolio, which reduced her income by 2/3, and for which he was charging a fee. Well, that was not good for the customer, but it was good for the financial advisor. And you sit back and ask yourself the question sometimes, well, is that ethical and is that okay? No. But does it happen? Yes. regularly. And then we can go to another one. Well, this one is not good for the company. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to make this a little lighter for you. So here's the example. How many people in here have children or grandchildren that play soccer? Raise your hands. Okay, you got a few. Okay. Soccer is not huge in South Carolina, but we've got people that always have the little children, grandchildren, whatever, playing soccer. They run up and down the field trying to chase the ball, and it's just absolutely a hoot to watch. But here's the example that I'm going to give you. So we've got someone that comes along, and let's say that last year, Ted, who works in your office, okay, Ted's granddaughter played soccer, and there is a regional soccer championship that's going to take place in Bismarck. I'm going to make this very simple for me, and all of the soccer teams are going to come together, and this is a way to raise money so that the kids can have an outlet to be able to play, etc. And so last year, Ted created the posters, 8.5 by 11, black on white, please come to our tournament. They were boring, but he did what he needed to do. But this year, little Sally comes to me, or actually I'm going to make it my granddaughter. Mally comes to me, my granddaughter, and she says, Chucky, that's what she calls me. When I became a grandfather, my wife says to me, what's your grandpa name? I said, Chuck. She said, no, is it Papa, Peepaw, Meemaw, whatever, what's your grandpa name? I said, Chuck. She said, you're being obstinate. What's your grandpa name? I said, Chuck. She said, why are you being this way? And I said, because the grandparents are the next to go. So I want to be thought of as an old father, so they can call me Chuck, okay? So I'm Chucky. So my little granddaughter comes to me and she says, Chucky, can you make the posters this year for the soccer tournament that's taking place? And I'm like, well, sure. And she just reaches in and massages my heart, and I think to myself, I've got to do something better than black and white, because that was just boring last year. I've got to make an impact for my little granddaughter. So I go and sit down at the computer at the office computer, and I'm sitting there supposed to be working, but I'm going to take some time because of course we don't work 8 hours a day all the time. And I start looking for pictures. And I start finding pictures of little children playing soccer. And I start right-clicking them and taking the pictures and putting it on the desktop. Of course, that is a violation of copyright. But I'm not thinking about that and the fact that the company can be held liable for the copyright violation. But, we're not thinking of those things. And I make this beautiful poster. It is a lovely poster. Except it is going to be full color on a completely white page. And I think to myself, how am I going to print that? Now I need to print 1,000 copies. So I could go home, print it on my inkjet printer, and you all know the little cartridges of ink cost $40, so a gallon of that stuff is like $700, which is just crazy. Or I could come over here to the company's brand new Kyocera Sharp Minolta Xerox copier, that does some front and back, staples, full color. I mean, it is the copier that, and I hit print and print 1,000 copies on the company copier, knowing that I am using the company toner cartridge and printing it out. And of course, everybody does that stuff. And I take it back and I give it to my granddaughter. Good for me. Good for my granddaughter, not good for the company. And yet I would ask you this question, just a simple question. How many people, don't raise your hands. This is not good to raise your hands. This is not one to raise your hands on. But how many of you know that there is somebody that somehow was using company facilities for personal gain? I have to tell you, I was talking with a guy the other day, and he said, you're not going to believe. He said, my son got in trouble at school. He stole a pencil, got in trouble, and I took him home, and I said, what is wrong with you, boy? If I had known you needed a pencil, I'd have gone and got one from the office. Kind of makes you wonder sometimes. All right, then we can go to it's a policy violation. Okay, so the policy violation is this. Here's the policy. Some of you are really going to get this in the room. Some of you it's going to be just a little too out there for, but here's the policy. Policy, don't send stupid emails to people. Now, y'all know what I'm sorry. See, there was that y'all thing. But y'all know what I'm talking about when I say don't send stupid emails. Y'all, I got to tell you, I love my mother. But she sends stupid emails. If it is political, if it is sexual, if it is religious, and she thinks it's funny, she gonna send the email to me and everybody she can think of. And some of you know what I'm talking about. You get those emails. And either you find them funny, or you know that there's a certain number of people that get them, and you know what? It's not funny. It might used to have been, but it's not today. Because it can get you in trouble. In fact, I will tell you, I say this, I love my stepfather, he's a wonderful man. But my youngest son said to him not long ago, said, Papa Bob, says, let me ask you a question. He said, all right. He said, were you the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan? And Bob says, why did you say such a thing like that? He says, because you're the most racist human being I've ever met. Which, by the way, is true. Now, I love my stepfather, but my wife and I will not go with him to certain places. Like, we won't go to Chick-fil-A with Bob, because we do not know what's coming out that man's mouth, and there's little children around, and they do not need to be subjected to that. So sometimes we can set up a policy. That doesn't mean everybody will follow it. You'll notice on these three, I put a note out there that they're generally accepted in the workplace. What I mean by that is they're not promoted in the workplace, they're tolerated. It's easy to start down this slippery slope. And then let's say you get to the slope of it's unethical. Let's say, for example, that in the medical world, there would be a simple rule. Your ethical guidelines would say that if you have medicine that's at your location and the medicine has expired, that medicine should be appropriately destroyed. Okay? I see people shaking their heads. Yes, that is correct. Okay? That's the ethical rules. Except what happens when somebody comes along and they look at it and they say, well, you know, that's just a suggestion. I mean, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden on the day that it's, you know, past its shelf life that it goes bad. I mean, you probably can still take the penicillin, but we have to get rid of it, so why don't I just go ahead and take it home? Unethical? Yes. Illegal? Yeah. That's the kind of thing that as you slip down the slippery slope, you start to think, well, it really doesn't make a difference until it makes a difference. And all it takes is one violation to change your life. So the question is, what would cause an otherwise honest person to make or do dishonest things? So let me share with you a little bit about the story. It was 1990, it's a long time ago, and at the time I was a CPA. I was tax partner in a CPA firm. I had written articles in national tax magazines. I had testified before Congress on various aspects of the tax law. I taught continuing professional education courses in 30 states. I don't know if you all have to have continuing education. I think some of you do. So you have to go and sit in these classes and listen to somebody talk on, and I got to do that for 8 hours on tax law. I know you think that's so exciting. But we did fun stuff, like have sing-along songs. Do y'all have sing-along with your continuing education? Oh, that's sad. You need to have fun things, you know, like tax returns, money on the way. We fill out the messy forms, but the clients have to pay. I mean, things like that. Something that can really make a Christmas party liven up. So here I am, I'm teaching a group of CPAs in Idaho. It was on the Employer Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. I know you all are excited about that, have no clue what I just said. But it was related to retirement plans. And so here we are going through the process of this class, and my stomach's on East Coast time, we're on Mountain time, and I'm starting to get a little hungry, and we're getting ready to break for lunch. And in those days, not today, in those days, when you stepped out of your meeting, and you went into the halls, there was a bank of phones. Phone. And that's how people call back to the office. You didn't get the chance to reach in your pocket, pull out a computer, which was much more powerful today than what it was then, and pick up the telephone and call somebody. So I get outside the door at lunch, and there is this pink slip. While you were out, call your office ASAP. So I look and I think to myself, okay, I can go get some lunch, or I can make the telephone call, and everybody was going to lunch, so the phones were free. So I go over, pick up the phone, place a call back to the office. Have no clue why I'm doing this, but I need to make the call. Ultimately, one of my partners gets on the phone. Here's the conversation. Chuck, I know you're out somewhere. I don't know where you are. I'm not sure when you're coming back. But you've invested some money for one of our clients, and they've had a change of circumstance. And I've been getting calls all day. And they need to liquidate the investment. They need to change it. They need to get their money out of it, and they need to do it ASAP. If you'll tell me where the file is, I'll go ahead and begin that process. God knew, and I knew the truth. And the truth was, I had not invested that client's money. Truth was, I had stolen it. And as I heard his voice on the line, I thought to myself, what am I going to do? So I did the only thing that I knew to do at the moment. Because all of a sudden, life had thrown me a real big curveball. So I said to him, I says, Dan, he said, look, it's not like this was invested with Charles Schwab. Chuck, I can't just call, liquidate the investment, have the money in 3 days, everything be fine. By the way, I'm in Idaho. I'll be back in Morganton tomorrow. So here's what I'm going to do, because I know more about this than anybody. Of course I did, because I was the culprit, but I know more about this than anybody. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and make a quick call. I'll get some things started, give the client a call back, tell them that we've got the process started for the liquidation, and let them know I'll be back tomorrow. That will be the quickest, easiest thing, and get him off your back. Will that be okay? By the way, I've got to go to lunch. We're on a different time zone, and I'm going to have to get back to the meeting. Listen, I'll talk to you later. See ya. Bye. When I got off the telephone, here's what I knew. I knew that while a part of my life was based upon legitimate success, I had made a series of choices. I started down that slippery slope, and it kept getting bigger. And on that day in November of 1990, somebody had reached out into that house of cards that I created, pulled a card, and started this. And I could, for the moment, see the house of cards collapse. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't remember the rest of the afternoon. I kind of lost my appetite, obviously. And as the CPAs came back in, and as we continued the process that afternoon, I continued to teach the course. And when the class was over and the CPAs were kind and left the room, much like the room we're in, before it changed, I sat down on the podium and I cried like a baby. Because I knew that the wrong choices that I had made were getting ready to create a consequence for me that I'd never imagined. Now, that night, I remember going back to the hotel. And I know this is kind of heavy for a mid-afternoon, but I went back to the hotel that afternoon and I thought to myself, there is one solution that is crystal clear to me. Suicide. But I'm a guy, and I don't like pain. Y'all ladies in the room understand this. Most men aren't good with pain. If we were, well, it might be different. But if it was up to us to have babies, I don't think so. There would not be nearly as many people as there is in the world. We don't mind trying to make them. We don't want to have them. That is a painful experience. So I go back in the room and I'm thinking to myself, if I were to end it, how? And I'm like, well, I don't have a gun, okay. I can't park the car in the garage kind of thing. It's okay. I'm not making fun of this. I'm just telling you what went through my mind. I had a blue Bic shaver. And I thought, that doesn't even get a good shave. So, it's not going to do any good. It's just going to create scrapes. And then I thought I could jump off the building. But from jump to, when it's over, what do you think? So I did the only thing that made sense at the moment. I went over to the counter in the hotel, opened the drawer, and pulled out the Yellow Pages. Today, the young folk do not know what Yellow Pages are. They're things that they set at your door that you immediately put into the recycling bin because you Google it. And that's how you get information, and it's so much easier and so much more fun. My wife the other day asked me, she said, I need to know my doctor's telephone number. I'm going to look in the Yellow Pages. And I'm like, Google, Google, Google. And I did it on the telephone, had it like that. And she said, you're going to have to teach me how to use that smartphone. So I'm looking in the Yellow Pages for psychiatrists, psychologists, proctologists. I didn't care. If it started with the P, I was interested. Somebody needed to talk to Chuck. And then this is what I got. Now this is a dark night of the soul night. And you're calling a psychiatrist and you have reached the office of Dr. Such and Such. Our office hours are from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. I'm sorry you've reached us after office hours. If you'll leave your name and number in a brief message, we'll be happy to give you a call. And have a nice day. Have a nice day when you're thinking about offing yourself just ticks you off. Could have been the best message ever got. I got that on number 1. Second call. Third call. Fourth call, fifth call, sixth call, seventh call. Somebody answers the telephone. I'm figuring it's an answering machine, just like everything else I've received, but there's a guy on the other end. I say, hello. He says, hello. And I'm waiting for the rest of the message. There was no rest of the message. I says, listen, I need to talk to somebody. He said, I thought this was my wife. He said, we were supposed to have dinner. I was supposed to meet her 10 minutes ago. I'm running 10 minutes late. He said, I'm so sorry. If I hadn't known it was you, I would have not answered the phone. And I'm like, well, doesn't that make you feel warm and special? So I said, I'm considering suicide. And he said, let's talk. I don't know the man's name. I don't know if he was a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or the janitor. I have no clue. But I can hear his words etched in my mind. It's like a tombstone. It's like this was etched. And here's what he said. He said, son, you've made a terrible mistake. But you are not a mistake. Think about that for just a second. You've made a terrible mistake, but you are not a mistake. He said the choices that you make tonight will define your life in the future and the legacy that you leave for your 2 children. Make those choices wisely. Now, part of this is fairly obvious because obviously I made the right choice. And so that night I eventually went to sleep, I guess. Again, I don't remember particularly the details. But that night I get to sleep. The next morning I'm flying back to my home. And here I am, I'm flying across the country, and I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be a way out of this, there's got to be a way out of this, there has got to be a way out of this, there's got to be a way out of it. I mean, there's got to be something somehow, there's got to be a way somehow this is going to work itself out. I'm not sure how it's going to work itself out. But when I get home, I've got to talk to my partners and I've got to talk to my wife. I mean, I have got to talk to some folks and just lay it out and see what the possibilities are. I've got a quick question for you. We're going to do a survey. How many of you believe that I talk to my partners first? Raise your hands. Okay, I've got 10 people in the room. How many of you believe I talk to my wife first? Raise your hands. Okay, thank you. At the risk of messing up the evaluations, I needed a practice session, y'all, okay? So I decided I'd give the partners a shot first. You know, you got to have that first round of making sure. It's like playing at the Masters. You got to have a practice round before you go for the real thing. So I go and I sit down with my partners. I come in, they seem to be happy to see me. They have no clue what's getting ready to take place. We sit down. I said, we need to have a conversation. He said, what is it? They thought I'd picked up some new big account. And I said, I'm a liar and a thief. Here's what I've done. And there was silence. And then one of my partners looks at me. He says, I've got a solution. I thought to myself, oh Lord, thank goodness somebody got a solution. I knew when I came home, my partners would come through for me. We're probably going to go to the bank, borrow the money, pay off this stuff. They're going to take me to the woodshed, beat me like a stepchild. All of which would have been okay. He looked at me and he said, I think you need to off yourself. He said, I got kids just like you. He said, do you have any idea what you've done that could impact everyone you're connected with? This firm? I mean, what if the firm goes under? How am I going to put my kids through school? What kind of partner are you? He said, look, here's the deal. He said, you're no kind of husband. Did your wife know? I bet she knew, didn't she? No, she didn't have a clue. He said, then you're no husband. He says, and certainly, what kind of father are you going to be to your two sons? He said, here's the deal. He said, you've got enough life insurance and you've passed the 2-year contestability period that you can offer yourself, and there's going to be enough insurance to take care of the partners, the people that you stole money from, pay those people off, to take care of your wife and to send your 2 children to college of their choice. And he said, the community will have pity for your wife. You don't deserve to be here. That wasn't exactly what I was thinking about, okay? The other partner looks at me with this like Donald Trump kind of hair flare thing. You're fired. Okay, I expected that. That was not an unreasonable expectation. He said, now here's what you need to do. You're going to cooperate with us so you can tell us what took place. And he said, Chuck, I don't know what's going to happen to you, but you'll never be a CPA again. He said, this career, over. He said, but I suspect somewhere along the line you'll end up in, I don't know, sales and marketing. 10 years following my release from prison, I was the senior vice president of sales and marketing in a public company. So it's kind of weird to me now, because in the old days, my first partner wanted me to commit suicide, so he read my mind from the night before. And one of the other partners, well, he predicted the future. Now, as I go through this process, I want to share with you the how intention creates behavior. So I need to actually go backward just a little bit. I would say to you, I need to rewind the tape. And some of you in the room will understand exactly what that means. And then there are others of you in the room, I have seen you, you are very young, and you don't know what rewind the tape means. Tape, what tape are we talking about? I mean, you know, I'm thinking 8-track, reel-to-reel, cassette, stuff that music used to be on. Y'all young people, it just flies through the air and hits your phone, and the next thing you know, you got music. It's amazing. I love this stuff. But we're going to rewind the tape for a second, because we're going to talk about the 3 components of an ethical lapse. And before I begin the process of doing this, I want to point out something to you. I keep pulling out a cell phone, and on the screen, most every slide, you will notice at the bottom it says that if you have questions, text 828-244-1400. So let me give you permission if you want to use your cell phone, because there is a question you have in this room about anything that we're talking about. Feel free to text that question to me. I will, when it's time to take questions, look at the cell phone and we'll read the questions from there. So feel free to text the questions to 828-244-1400. Operators are standing by. Well, not really, but you kind of get the gist of it. So we're going to talk about the three components of an ethical lapse, and I want to go back further, not 1990, but 1987. So I'm going to go back to 1987, and in 1987, I'm sitting here, and I put up this three-legged stool because this is the perfect visual picture of the way this works. By the way, if I had a choice to bring a three-legged stool with me, I would, but to take the legs off of the stool means that you have clubs, and airlines don't allow you to have that because you could whack somebody. Of course, I get 3 sets of handcuffs, so I could handcuff the flight attendants to the drink cart, but that's just a different issue. Not by the way that I've thought of that, it's just one of those things that crosses your mind. So it's 1987, and in 1987, I'm tax partner in this firm in this small town in North Carolina, and I get a call from David, the banker. Works with NCNB. Anybody know what NCNB stood for? Okay, y'all from North Dakota, so you wouldn't know that. It used to be North Carolina National Bank, but we called it no cash for nobody because that's tended to be the way the bank operated. But David calls me. He says, Chuck, this was January 1987. Chuck, I hate to ask you this question, but it appears that you're 2 months behind in your house payment. Is there a problem? Now, the truth was, I was 2 months behind in my house payment. That was the truth. But I'm sitting there when I get this call, thinking to myself, well, what am I going to say? Now, some of you sitting in the room would say, well, you say yes. But now think about it for just a moment. Okay, just think about it for just a moment. If I said yes to the banker who sent me business, and I'm in the accounting business, which meant I'm supposed to know how to help people manage their money, if in fact that's what was taking place, for me to admit that I couldn't manage my own financial affairs was probably not something that would be well received. In fact, it's probable that the banker would have said, well, okay, we might work out something, but when the phone was hung up, he'd be wondering. So I'm sitting there on the telephone, and David says, you're 2 months behind in your house payment. It's 1987. Keep in mind, computers were just really kicking in at this point in time. IBM just had a new PC. Apple had the Apple II. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were just young pups. And all of us that were alive should have invested in those two companies. Just a side note, just so you know. But if I had said to him yes, that would have created a problem. So I was thinking to myself, what am I going to say whenever he's confronted me with the fact that I'm 2 months behind? And you see, at the end of tax season, I was going to get a big bonus, which meant that I would have had the money to pay the payment that I was a little behind in. So I said, well, David, apparently the payment's been misapplied. I just used a term that I could deal with, that he could deal with, and he says, well, he said, Chuck, I don't think so. But he said, let me do this. Let me go back and check our records, and I'll get back with you after lunch. How will that be? That sounds good, David. And we hung up. Now, at this point, I had a need. This was very simple. And I would ask this question, but not for a hand raise. But I have to assume, with as many people as we have in the room, there is a fair chance that all of us at one point in time have found ourselves perhaps a little overextended and underfunded, or we have had a need arise in our life that made life a little challenging. So I had this need, and that would be the first step of this three-legged stool. Need. Now, this was simple. For me, the need was I needed 2 months for a house payment. What if it's other people? Like Bernie Madoff. Nobody knew who Bernie Madoff's name was across the country until he created the largest Ponzi scheme in history and is now spending 130 years in federal prison. What was Bernie's need? It wasn't money. Bernie's need was to be infallible. It was an emotional need. And needs come in different forms. I was talking the other day with an attorney who was defending a 62-year-old female. She was in the southeast United States. She had been the treasurer of her church for 32 years. In fact, people would have said she was the pillar of the church. When the pastor came and went, she was the person that was there. She knew the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not steal, she got. Until her granddaughter developed a rare form of cancer. And there was no FDA-approved treatment. But there were treatments outside of the country. And she didn't want her granddaughter to die. Her life changed. Her need changed. So here I am facing this need. The question would be, how am I going to solve it? Now, there were several simple solutions. One, I could go to the banker, tell him the truth, potentially impact my career, and they probably would have deferred the payment for a couple of months and life would have been okay. That would have been honest. I did not choose that. The second option would have been, I could have gone to my partners and I could have said, guys, I'm a little under the weather here in terms of some money. I need an advance against my bonus at the end of April. Let's see if we can work that out. However, the partners that wrote the checks were out on an audit that Friday, and they were not available to be able to make that advance. That didn't work. I could have gone to my mother. However, she lived in Baltimore. And in 1987, the transmission of money wasn't quite the same as it is in 2015. So having her loan me the $2,000 I needed wasn't something that was going to happen quickly. So, quick question. How many people in here born in the month of June? Raise your hands. I got a few. I got a little pocket over here, a little pocket over there. Can't tell in the back of the room exactly what we've got. So it appears that your companies are discriminating against people born in June. I'm really upset about this. It's a sad thing. If you were born in June and you were a Gemini, not that I follow astrology, but Geminis are supposed to be the twins. For those of you that are born in June and you talk to yourself, that's quite normal. Let me just share that tidbit with you. In 1987, if you were driving down the road talking in the car and people saw you riding down the road talking in the car, they thought you were crazy. Now today, they think it's Bluetooth. So the question you have to ask is how many crazy people are on the road that we think are just talking on Bluetooth? I'm just sharing that so you ask yourself these simple questions. So here it was 1987, I was the trustee of a client's trust. A client had set money aside for their children for a college education, and I was the trustee. So here is how it played. Well, I'm the trustee of the trust, and it's my responsibility for making sure that I invest the client's money and get the best return possible. Well, I'm behind in my house payment and I can't really manage my money well, and I've got a problem and I need to get a short-term loan and we need to be able to work out something, but I need some cash real quick because in about 2 hours he's going to call me and tell me it ain't misapplied and therefore I've got to pay it. Well, this is highly unusual, but what if I loaned you the money and we charged, let's say, 10% interest per quarter, 40% per year? See, that's a great return for the client's money. That makes sense, right? Well, look here. I'm going to get a bonus at the end of tax season, so, I need $2,000 today. So if I pay $2,200 at the end of tax season, problem, I can do that. That's really going to solve my problem here real quick. Well, this is highly unusual, so we're going to have to do something to make this legitimate. Time out. The second part, after need, is opportunity. I had a need. Here was the opportunity. Now, if you ask me, Chuck, would you ever voluntarily just steal from somebody? No, of course not. See, I've got to somehow rationalize my behavior. I had a need, here was the opportunity, and in my mind, I was just borrowing the money. Now, think in your line of work, what a person might do, what might the need be? Where's the opportunity? How can I rationalize it? Because as long as I could put those three legs of the stool together, here's the need, stand on the stool and balance it. Not going to happen with one leg. Here's the opportunity. Three-legged stool, stand on the stool and balance it with two legs. Not going to happen. Well, unless you're Cirque du Soleil, you can do anything. Or number three, rationalize it on the backside, stand on it, and you can make anything happen. 3 steps to ultimately determining how a person that is intelligent can make dishonest, unethical, and potentially illegal choices. Okay, so here's what happened. So the banker calls me back. Chuck, I've checked the records, and before he could get any further, this was really good. I was masterful on this. I said, David, I am so sorry. I said, I cannot believe what's happened. I have to admit, I am behind. I'm going to have to bring you a check. I'm going to bring it down within the next hour with stolen money. I didn't say that, of course, okay? But ladies in the room, let me tell you, I'm just getting ready to offend you all. I don't mean to do that. But, you know, my wife and I, we just had our first child at the end of November. She pays the bills. Not true. But I needed an Adam and Eve moment. I needed to blame somebody. She pays the bills. You see, she thought I was taking care of it since we just had our first child. I thought she was taking care of it. Neither one of us did. I can't believe it. This is so embarrassing. David, I'm going to bring you the money. I'll bring it down in just a little bit. And then David said to me, Chuck, let me share something with you. He said, when I was in college, I passed a bad check once. Oh, we had a male bonding moment. You know, I'd screwed up, he'd screwed up. We both acknowledged that. And I stole the money. I paid the house payment, rationalized it, and at the end of tax season, guess what happened? Got a big bonus, and I paid it back. And then it was like cement. Because at that moment, it connected in my head that, you know, I really did just borrow the money. Maybe I could do this again. And I did it again. And I paid it back. And I got to thinking, well, shucks. I've got my own private little hedge fund over here. I've got my own private little bank. It wouldn't be a lot different, quite frankly, than the example that I used earlier, where at the facility you have drugs that have expired, and the job is you've got to dispose of them. And so here you are, you're going to dispose of them properly, but, you know, I mean, after all, really, are they messed up? Probably not. So if somebody doesn't see the way I dispose them, because instead of having 2 people watch it, there's just one person that does, I'll take the propofol or whatever it happens to be, stick it in my pocket, and just go home. I mean, you know, there's somebody at home that might need that. Now, I'm going to assume that the great majority of people in this room would say, well, no, that would never happen. It isn't what it is, it's how it is. Now, I want to use, I want to use a quick example, and I need to tell you this. So everybody in this room gets this. This is one of those pay attention moments. I'm going to give you an example that is not true. I know some of you are like, he wore an orange jumpsuit out here. This is not good if he's not telling me the truth. But let me tell you, I made up this example. I made up this example this past March when I was in Los Angeles. And I was doing a presentation, and it was to a bunch of financial services professionals, and they were sitting there with their arms folded, and they were thinking to themselves, I would never do anything wrong. Wow, how easy it is to think, I'll never do anything wrong. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to step out of their comfort zone, and I'm going to go in a different direction. Here's the example that I made up, ladies, please, so you know. Here's the example I made up. So I told the group, I said, look, I've been married for 16 years. And the spark just isn't there. 16 years ago when I walked in, she was like, oh yeah. She would look at me like she wanted me. And I walked in and I felt wanted. And I loved the feeling of wanted. And it was good. There was like this little sizzle, this spark. I'd be out, I'd come in, I would have that swagger coming in. She'd dip me down. Well, no, I'd dip her down. We would have to kiss and so forth and so on. And it wasn't long until we didn't worry about dinner. And I'm sitting there thinking, it's 16 years later and the thrill is gone. There's no desire. I'm sorry, I can't break into song every once in a while, but it just wasn't exactly that same feeling. I wasn't feeling the love. So here I am, I'm out in Los Angeles thinking to myself, man, I sure would like to feel that feeling one more time. And so I go down to the Hilton where I'm speaking the next day, go down to the bar. They've got TVs all around. Remember, this is made up. Just sharing this with you, because some of y'all getting into this, and you're, okay? I go down and I look at all the TVs, they're sitting there, they're made up, the game is on, it's March Madness, and I'm sitting there watching Duke play ball, and I'm like, yes, that's what I'm talking about, maybe gonna win this year, you never know, but this is good, and it's packed and crowded, and this young little lady comes sitting down beside me, and she was fine. Oh, Lord, was a fine lady. And she starts talking. And she says, man, I like Duke. And she's talking about some of the players. And I'm like, a woman can talk about the players from Duke. And we're sitting out here in Los Angeles. Well, I think this is all right. And we strike up a nice little conversation. Found out she went to Wake Forest. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I went to Appalachian up in the mountains. But anybody but Carolina is good for me. That was my mantra. So that's why Duke. And so we got to talking. And I'm sitting there thinking, she seems to like me. Yeah. Starting to feel that one more time. And then she says, it's awfully noisy down here. She reaches in her pocket, she takes out the room keys, and she sets one of them down. Have you ever noticed the hotel gives you 2 keys? Have you asked yourself the question, why is that a natural occurrence for a hotel? I come and check in at this facility and they give me 2 keys. They didn't ask me, they just gave me 2 keys. I'm just me. Who else do I need to give that key to? But she takes one of the keys out, sets it down on the counter. She says, listen, I've got a suite upstairs. It's awfully noisy up here. If you'd like to come upstairs, we can watch the game, order a bottle of wine, and it'll be much more comfortable. Well, I need to feel like I'm the man. Opportunity. I'm in Los Angeles. Home is South Carolina. I'm at the Hilton. We're watching a ball game in this public space. Rationalization. She's invited me up to her room. Well, what you don't know won't hurt you. Heck, there's a city that promotes themselves based on the idea of rationalization. What city is it? Las Vegas. What you don't know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Unless you're Prince William or Henry, whichever the red-headed one was that was in naked pool. I don't know if y'all remember that, but he was playing pool, and every time he lost, he had to take his clothes off, and there he was naked. Somebody took a picture of it, tweeted that puppy. That was in Vegas. Not a good move. The Queen was not excited about that. She took his butt home, put him on a helicopter, sent him to Afghanistan for 3 years. I bet you he ain't going to be naked in Vegas again. That's all I got to say. Every choice has a consequence. Huh. Now, I sat there and I used that example. I finished up the presentation. This man makes his way up to the front. He comes up, he reaches out, he starts talking to me, and he says, "Who told you?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "No, who told you?" I don't understand. He said, "Who told you about 2 nights ago?" And I was like, nobody. But human behavior is, if the need is strong enough, we'll find the opportunity and take action on it if we can rationalize it. That's human behavior. Here's a graph. Let me deal with this graph for just a second. Someone asked me the question yesterday. It was a really profound question. She said, "Chuck, in your experience, what is the thing that causes someone to act unethically? Is it greed and power?" That was the question. And the answer is no. It's life out of balance. Think about this for a second. Think about your family. Think about your coworkers. Think about people that are close enough to you that you know them well. As long as life is in balance, we'll make the right choices. If everything is in balance, we'll make the right choices. But what happens when life gets out of balance? What happens when that need gets crazy? Look what happens on the graph. When the need gets really big, notice the area in the opportunity area. There's a whole lot more area to find an opportunity to solve the need. And you'll notice there's a whole lot more area up in the rationale area to solve that need, which means where all 3 of them come together, there's more opportunity to make a decision that could have life-changing consequences. I'm a pilot. I fly small planes. And so as a pilot, when I was flying small planes, I remember in my early stages of my flight career, the flight instructor sat down in the seat beside me. I'm sitting here. He puts a blindfold on me and he says, "Okay, now, take your hands off of everything. I've got this." And we took off and we flew, and he contorted that plane every which way you could imagine. Sideways, up, down, over, twisting. I mean, short of getting sick as a dog, I had no clue where we were in that plane. And then we're sitting there, and I'm like, what in the world's going on? And he said, "Okay, I'm taking my hands off of everything and letting go." I said, "What?" He said, "Watch what happens." And when I let go, the plane eventually went right back to normal because it was designed to fly. It's designed to be at a natural state. That's what it's designed to do. Our lives are designed to be in balance. But when they're out of balance, that's the time when we have the greatest possibility of making choices that don't make any sense. So, let me give you a bit of a reality check. I said to you that on October 2nd, 1995, I took 23 steps into prison. When I got into prison, they took me over to a cell. It was 10 feet long, 8 feet wide. It had a wooden bench and a stainless steel toilet. They handed me paperwork and they said, "Here, read the rules." Doom. And the door shuts. And I sat there and I began reading the rules. And I noticed it's printed on paper and it's crooked. Now, the first thing my smart aleck self thought was, I have never seen crooked $5 or $10 bills, so if this is the federal government, you think they could print it straight. Quack, 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 quack. I should not have thought those thoughts. I read the rules. It took 12 minutes. And then I sat there for well over 2 hours, probably 2.5 or so. Almost 3 hours after that experience, I heard a key in the door, and this big metal door starts to open. Now, let me say this to you. I want to give you a realistic perspective of what took place. Okay? I'm not making fun of anybody. I want you to know that. I'm just telling you what took place. So the door opens. There's a gentleman on the other side. He's got a white lab coat on. On the pocket is stitched Pedro. He was a physician's assistant. He looks at me. He says, "Step out of the cell. It's time for your TB test." I'm like, what did that man say? Step out of the cell. It's time for your TB test. Time for my TB test. Okay. Isn't that the thing that's a syringe that's got 4 needles on the end of it? Or used to? Now, y'all, I got to tell you this. I am petrified of needles. I am allergic to needles. Needles and Chuck do not work together. I just want to share that little tidbit with you. So here I am thinking to myself, okay, wait a minute. The first thing I've got to do is step out and get somebody to stick me in the arm with 4 needles. This is not good. And 2 weeks before I went in, I watched The Shawshank Redemption. Let me share with you, that was not a wise movie to watch if you were getting ready to be incarcerated. I'm just saying. I step out, the next door opens. There is a huge African-American man. I mean, we're talking Refrigerator Perry, big, huge guy. Smiled, had 2 gold teeth there. The light shone on him. Bing! You know, it was like, this was a big old boy. He steps out. The guy at the end steps out. He was a skinny Hispanic fella. His neck was solid in tattoos. And I'm thinking to me, that had to be painful. Needle, 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 needle. I mean, you know, when somebody don't like pain, that's painful. And so he says to me, roll up your sleeve. I roll up my sleeve, and I'm thinking to myself, God, I cannot pass out. This would not be good. He takes the needle, takes a syringe, takes the plastic off of it, boom. And I'm thinking, okay, Chuck, be tough, be strong. You can do this. And the room starts going like this. And I'm thinking, this is not good. I said, yo, man, I need to sit down. Pedro stands there and says, what's wrong, man? You allergic to needles? I wanted to smack him. You're allergic to needles? And then he screams at the top of his lung, we've got a fainter. And I'm like, well, thank you so much. On my way to passing out, I will be someone's wife before the night is over. Refrigerator Perry gets me. He says, yo, man, it's okay. So I don't like needles either. He said, here, sit down. Nobody was going to mess with me with that man between me and, I mean, it was not possible. He said, we'll be all right. He says, you know, we have to put up with stuff that we don't want to have to put up with. He says, you'll be okay, sit down. Pedro just went on to the next. We finished that experience. It was time to get my clothes, my orange jumpsuit. So I go over, I get the orange jumpsuit, I'm walking through the prison lot. Everybody is seeing the new guy, trying to size you up. I step into my cell. My cellmate stands there. He looks at me. He was a little black fella, about 5'7". He looked at me. His name was Buck. My name is Chuck. We were Buck and Chuck. I do not know if they did that for comic relief or not. But he did not say a word to me. Not a word. I'm thinking to myself, well, look, if he's not going to talk, I'm not going to talk because I'm not sure I really know the rules. I mean, all I got was those 12 pages of the things that was all messed up. I did not go to Barnes & Noble and buy Prison for Dummies, which would have been a really good book. Nothing happens for 24 hours. 24 hours later, Buck steps in. He looks at me. He says, yo, man, what you in here for? And I'm thinking to myself, he has spoken. I've got to say my first words now. And I'm thinking, I have got to be tough. So I had to put on my Clint Eastwood, John Wayne kind of, I'm bad. I said, I'm a liar and a thief. Which, as I sit back and think about it, had to have been the funniest doggone thing for this little feller to see. He says, yo, man, word? Word? Yo, man, I said, word. Word. You don't know what I'm talking about, do you? And he flies out of the cell. Now, we're going to have a little timeout moment here, okay? So just y'all get this. So some of y'all are sitting there thinking, word? What does that mean? Okay, so here's the lingo. Word? Are you giving me your word? Is that what you mean? Are you serious? Oh, man, I can't believe that. That's what word is. I didn't know what it was. I was far too Caucasian to know that, okay? So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, it has been 24 hours. This is our first exchange. And I don't know what he's just said. And he left me. Then he come flying back in the room. He says, yo, man, he says, I'll make you a deal. He says, you're not going to survive in here. I'm thinking, that's a great thing to say. Thanks very much. He said, you ain't going to survive in here. He says, you don't know the lingo. You don't know what to say. You don't understand. He says, somebody need to have your back. He says, I tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I'm thinking to myself, I've been here 24 hours and a convict wanted to make a deal with me. And then I thought, but I am a convict, so I guess it's okay. I don't know. They didn't have that in the rules. Buck says to me, he says, here's what I'll do. He said, I'll teach you the lingo. He said, I will have your back. He said, I will make it so that when you get out of here, you can go in the hood anywhere and you'll be okay, even in Baltimore. And all I can say is you better hope you have a mama like that one mama, because boy, that old boy got taken to the woodshed. That was a woodshed moment. He says, I'll make you the deal if you'll teach me how to speak correctly so when I get out I have a chance at getting a real job. And I will tell you that the experience that I had with Buck was more real, and he had more integrity than a lot of people that I did business with when I was free. See, it's not a function of where you are, it's what you do with where you are. And it's not a function of who the person is on the outside that's the illusion, but what difference they can make on the inside if they're willing to put themselves out there to make that happen. Now, I say that because what I want to do before I close things out is I want to open it up for some questions. And I have a few, so let me deal with a couple of questions. This is the opportunity, the 828-244-1400 moment, for those of you that might want to ask a few questions. The question, how long did it take you to forgive yourself? That's an interesting question. When I was admitted to prison, I did not really know who Chuck Gallagher was. I will tell you, prison was the worst experience of my life and the best thing that ever happened to me. Because I literally was able to find out who it was that was Chuck Gallagher. And when I found that out, that began the process of forgiveness. I will also say to you, it's 2015. I am reminded every day in some way of my experience in my past. My past does not define me. It creates an experience that allows me to be a better person today. Let me look at some of the other questions. Do you wish you would have told your wife first, and what did she say? No. I'm perfectly happy with the fact that I went with the partners first. Not that that hid anything from her, but that it was a process. Now, when I went and told my wife, I want to say to you, that was a devastating experience for her. She had no clue. I had set up the relationship such that she felt that she could do whatever needed to be done for our household. And I was money grew on trees kind of guy. So there was not any no's in the house. So when I went and told her what I had done, it literally was devastating. The most devastating impact, and I think most everybody in this room can understand this, the most devastating impact was the loss of trust. I do not care whether it is your marital relationship, whether it's a relationship with your child, whether it is your relationship at work. It doesn't make a difference what it is. All relationships that are strong are based on trust. And I broke that trust. Now, a fair question would be, which may have come up, and that fair question would be, did your marriage survive? And the answer is no. It survived for a couple of years. But eventually, it became very difficult for my wife to determine if I was telling the truth. It's an old commercial. Some of you in the room will remember. Is it live or is it Memorex? That goes back to the tape thing. Okay? When I opened my mouth, was I telling the truth or was I telling a lie? And she wasn't sure. So eventually, the marriage failed. Now, she and I are very good friends, and she wanted me to be a great father to my children. And I wanted to be a great father to my children. And to my children, I have been totally transparent. Whatever it is, it's total transparency. Because I knew that if I was transparent to them, there was a chance that there was going to be a legitimate relationship that we could count on for our lifetimes. I will also tell you that my wife was very concerned about what would happen to our kids in school. You know, when the kids go to school, are they going to be made fun of and so forth because, you know, their dad went to prison. Actually, the reverse took place. Nobody messed with my kids because Dad had been to prison. Not something to be proud of, but it did have quite a kind of a different reaction. Now, somebody's going to ask the question, if you haven't already, well, but aren't you remarried? And the answer is yes, for 16 years, in fact. So I've got to say to you, so here's what happened. So I decided I screwed up this first marriage because I wasn't truthful. So I needed to be blatantly honest to make sure that if there was a chance, it was going to work. So the first date with my wife was dinner and a movie, no big deal. Second date, we went out to dinner. I said to her, she wasn't my wife, of course, at the time. It was just the second date. I said, you know, I need to talk with you. She said, okay. I said, I might be going to prison. And she was like, oh, you're so funny. You to make all kind of funny jokes. You are one of the funniest people I've ever known. Think about it, ladies. What would you have done on the second date if the man said, I might be going to prison? She thought I was kidding. I said it for the third time. She thought I was kidding. Then she finally said, what for? I told her. She said, well, at least it's not murder. I felt like the dude on Dumb and Dumber, you know, when he looked at the girl and she had no interest and he says to her, is there a chance? And she says, 1 in a million. And he's like, yes, there is a chance. I was like, oh my goodness, if she'll go out on the third date, maybe there's a chance. Took 4 years, okay, so I had to work a little extra hard on this thing, but 16 years later, our marriage is based upon the concept of transparency, because I understand when you break trust, it doesn't work. Okay, let me look at some other quick questions. How much did you steal? Okay. Oh yes, how much was it? $254,000. Oh. I love the response that I get. People are like, oh. Or in the accounting community, that's nothing. Bernie Madoff, $16 billion. I mean, what's the deal? It doesn't make any difference how much it is. The how much isn't the relevant issue. It doesn't make any difference if you've had one affair or multiple affairs, or if you've stolen pills once or you steal them 15 times. The act is the issue, not the frequency or the amount. I have one other question. How long were you in prison? I was sentenced to 18 months active in prison. In federal prison, you have to serve 85% of that, so that meant I was in for a little over 16 months, and then I had 3 years probation. I started off with a statement. You can see it. It says every choice has a consequence. Those consequences still exist today. For example, I can't go into Canada. I've been to Canada 5 times to speak. The 6th time, I'm driving into Canada. The person asked me at the border, why are you coming here? I told him. He didn't understand. So he sent me over to another segment. They pull up and look more carefully at my passport and said, "You have been convicted of a felony. You need to go back to the United States." So I went back. Then the United States had to decide whether they wanted to let me back in. I was in no man's land. So to go to Canada, I had to apply for criminal rehabilitation. This is from a crime that occurred in 1987. For in 1995, I went to prison, and we're talking 20 to 30 years from time frames. And I applied for criminal rehabilitation for the country of Canada. It had to go through two people. One person said he's had no criminal activity since then, completely clean record. We believe this is not a problem. The other person said, "I don't think he feels remorse. He's speaking on this topic, and I don't think that's right. You cannot come to Canada." So I can literally travel to any other country in the world, but Canada. Plus, they wouldn't let me carry these on whenever I was flying in. I had to put them in put them under the plane. Can you believe that? Let me say this to you. I want to go back for just a second, and I want to recall for you a little story. I remember back in the 80s going to the grocery store. I remember going in and I was getting something to put on the grill. And so I walk into the grocery store, I go back to the meat counter, and I'm going to get some steak and shrimp, and I'm going to put it on the grill. And this was in the days when I was living that illusion. So I go back there, I grab my stuff up, I go to the checkout line, you know, the one that says 15 items or less, and somebody's got a full buggy checking out. But you know, I'm sitting there, the lines were full every other place, so I'm going through this process, and I set my stuff on the counter. Remember, this is the 80s, it was before the scanner days, you still had to enter things, and it's sliding down, and the lady standing behind the counter, she starts to check me out, and then she looks at me and she says, "You're Charles Gallagher." And when I went to college, I was Chuck. When I was in high school, I was Charles. So I knew the time frame that this was coming from. I said, "Well, yes." She said, "You don't remember me, do you?" Y'all, I didn't have a clue. Okay, I'm just telling you, not a clue. "You don't remember me, do you?" "I'm Susie, I'm from high school. I'm a reasonably nice guy." So I said, "Oh, Susie, how you doing?" She said, "Oh, I'm doing fine." She said, "I've been seeing articles about you in the paper and how well you're doing." She says, "Makes me feel so good." She said, "This is wonderful. I can't believe I've seen you here." And she said, "Do you have any children?" Now, guys, if a lady asks you if you have any children, get ready for the conversation. That's all I got to say. I said, "Yeah, I've got two. What about you?" The nice question. She reaches in her purse, takes out her wallet, and flips that puppy down, and here are the pictures of the 3 kids. And then she starts telling me about the 3 children. People behind me, if they had horns, they would have been blowing them, but she's got to tell about the 3 kids. Now, y'all, I'm going to tell you this so you understand the spirit in which I'm saying it. I wasn't trying to be mean. I was very respectful, but I was thinking to myself, I don't really care about your kids. I don't remember who you are. Would you just get me through the line? I got to go home so I can put this stuff on the grill. Cocky. But she told me about the kids and how wonderful it was to see me. Finally got me checked out. Said, I can't wait. I hope you come back. I'd like to talk to you again. And I walked out, swinging my bag, thinking to myself, can you believe that? Here this girl is. We went to high school together. I was getting ready to get in my BMW, bought with stolen money, but I didn't think of it that way at the time. Going home to put my steak and shrimp on the grill, and I thought, she's just a checkout chick at the grocery store. Then it was Christmas Day, 1995, and I'm in prison. I'm sitting there in my bunk, steel beams with a plastic mattress this thick. And I'm laying there, and I'm realizing to myself, in this prison of 500 men, most every man that day would spend some time shedding a tear, thinking about what Christmas would be like in the real world. And I was sitting there thinking about my two children, Rob and Alex, and it had occurred to me this is the first time in their lives that I wasn't with them. And the best that I could do, the best, was go to the payphone when I was allotted my 3 minutes, place a collect call, and tell them, Merry Christmas. Daddy loves you. It occurred to me that day that lady that I talked with so many years earlier was more of somebody than I ever dreamed of being. See, she was home that day with her 3 children. She was able to see the joy on their face. She was able to see what took place when they opened their presents and when she could fix breakfast for them. And if she needed a gallon of milk, she could go out because she had the freedom to go to the grocery store or the convenience store and get a quick gallon of milk if she needed. She knew who she was. I was trying to find that out. Every choice we make has a consequence. So, before I took the 23 steps, I thought I made good choices. I made choices that gave me all kinds of wonderful opportunities. I thought I made good choices. But after I became 11-6-42-058, I found out that every choice has a consequence. We may not know when it will take place or how it will take place, but you can take that it will take place. And before I took the 23 steps, I have to say I lived life as an illusion. Yes, most of my life was normal, real, legitimate. But then there was the part that was fantasy. There was the part that was based on, here's what I want to show you that I am, instead of the truth of who I am. After I became 11-6-42-058, I found out that every illusion eventually comes back to reality. It could be at the greatest show in the world, watching David Copperfield, the masterful illusionist. But the reality is, when it's all said and done, he's just like we are. It's just a show. And before I took the 23 steps, I thought I was successful. You see, I define success as the title, as the car, as the house, as the clothes, as the shoes, as the watch, as the whatever. It was all of the stuff. The young people today would call it bling. After I became 11-6-42-058, I found out something. Success has nothing to do with that. Success has to do with the impact that you have on other people's lives. If I ask you the question, who was Miss America 2002? Does anybody in the room, could you tell me who that was? Okay, unless you're looking it up on your phone, the answer's probably not, unless it was your cousin, your sister, or your daughter. But if I ask you, who was the teacher in your life that made the most profound impact? As I ask that question right now, everyone in the room knows the answer. So let me leave you with this. Think about the choices that you make, realizing that every choice has a consequence. Look past the illusions of what people want you to believe to the truth of what is, and know that you can have success in your life by impacting other people's lives. My mother-in-law told us the other day, she had at the time what was a minor stroke in the assisted living facility that she was in. And there was a lady there who came in and stayed with her and helped her get to a place where she could start to reconnect with everything being okay. And 2 days later, she said to us, she said, I can't tell you, with tears in her eyes, she said, I cannot tell you how good I felt that somebody was here with me and cared enough to stay with me to help me feel better. That's success. Make good choices, look past the illusion, and ladies and gentlemen, claim your success. Thank you.